My boss leaned in at the holiday party and whispered, "We'll kick him out after Christmas." That was the sentence that split my year cleanly in half, the months I spent building a $5 million deal brick by brick, and the seconds after, when I realized I was just a bow on his present. If you've ever felt your job tilt under your feet while everyone else laughed over cinnamon cocktails, stay with me. I'm going to tell you exactly how it sounded, how it smelled, and what I did the minute I understood. I was the last course on my own victory dinner. The venue was our conference center disguised as festive. Rented garlands over exit signs. Red uplights washing the drywall the color of a bloody nose. A Bluetooth speaker burped out an off-brand playlist, while marketing clinked candy cane stirs against glasses they'd expense tomorrow. I was there because the COO from our client had texted earlier. Flight delayed. Landed. Congrats on steering this, really. And because our attendance was strongly encouraged, which is HR for mandatory without being legally binding. I wasn't drunk, but I wanted to be. A year of pre-dawn plant tours and midnight calls will do that to you. The whisper came from behind a column where the fake snow drifted into a plug strip. I didn't mean to overhear it. My phone was already in my hand. Voice memo app still open from a note I'd recorded about Monday's kickoff checklist. I stepped aside to avoid a tray of sliders and caught my boss's reflection first. Perfect tie, the kind of smile that shows you his gums because he thinks it reads sincere. He leaned toward our VP of sales and said it casually, like he was ordering another drink. "We'll kick him out after Christmas, get signatures, then optics." He even laughed softly after optics, as if the word were an inside joke. If you want to know what betrayal smells like, it's cinnamon whiskey and hot printer toner. The air off the corridor was warm from a high-capacity copier, running end-of-year proposals. The scent settled behind my eyes as I stood very still, pretending to text, while the VP murmured something I couldn't hear, and my boss added, "He thinks the deal makes him untouchable." My phone screen reflected my own face back at me, grainy and washed in red light, jaw clenched like a stranger's. Here's the part that matters. I wasn't a hero, and I wasn't naive. I was a senior account manager with a calendar full of red-eye flights and a pocket notebook filled with dates, initials, and tiny circles to tick when I kept my promises. The $5 wasn't a lottery. It was a year of small, unglamorous things. I was at the client's plant the night a sensor array died, handing out earplugs because the temp fix screamed like a kettle. I was in their break room at 2:12 a.m. explaining why pilot failure is data, not shame. I knew which forklift driver's kid liked dinosaurs because I'd waited out a storm under loading bay 4 and the guy had shown me a crayon drawing folded into his wallet. Relationships are built where email bounces turn into coffee. My boss never liked that part. He liked stage lights and slide decks, the word narrative, and the way his name looked on a press release. To him, relationships were a means for credit. To me, they were the work. When the client's procurement officer wrote, "We'll need performance assurances in the MSA," I read every clause twice, highlighted the one that said the client could reassign delivery leadership by mutual agreement, and asked our legal to confirm it didn't conflict with my job description. "No non-compete for your role," our counsel said back in March, bored and brisk. "Standard confidentiality. Standard IP. Don't steal. Don't slander. Do your job." I took that seriously in both directions. Back at the party, a junior analyst looped a tinsel garland around my shoulders and called me our $5 million man, and I smiled like a man who hadn't just heard his name shrink inside someone else's sentence. I didn't go confront him. I didn't do a movie speech. I stood near the dessert station, let a gingerbread cookie go stale in my hand, and took inventory. What I knew, what I could prove, what I would not do, even to save myself. It sounds grand to say ethics, but it's smaller than that. It's a list of red lines you write privately and then discover in public. I thought about the client's COO, the one with the broken wrist from slipping on black ice in October, who still shook hands left-handed at the advisory board and apologized to every person whose palm she missed cleanly. She didn't trust charm, she trusted follow-through. She had once told me, quietly in a windowless conference room that smelled like dry erase ink, "I don't pick vendors, I pick people. Vendors come with them." She said it like a warning and a gift. I also thought about the ways my own company had hinted this might be coming, even before the whisper. Travel approvals cut the week before crucial site visits. Executive presence feedback dropped into my performance doc 2 weeks after I asked for hazard pay for the plant team. A stray comment in a pipeline meeting. Let's not over-personalize the relationship. We need flexibility post-close. You can hear a plan forming when your name starts getting replaced by your job title in other people's sentences. I left the party early with a to-go cup of burnt coffee I didn't drink. The air outside slapped my lungs clear. The parking lot was a black mirror speckled with salt. Inside my car, the silence was so complete I could hear the building's HVAC through the glass. I set the coffee into the cup holder, opened notes, and wrote down exactly what I'd heard, using quotes and timestamps. Then I wrote everything I could remember from the past month that felt suddenly relevant. Who had been on which calls, which documents had been sent, who had asked for pre-drafted announcement language, prematurely. Not because I wanted to fight, because I refused to be confused. I drove home on side streets that still had old snow in their gutters. At a red light, I remembered the plant supervisor's joke about my city shoes and smiled for the first time since the whisper. I wasn't alone in this story. A lot of good people had skin in this game, and none of them wore my boss's cologne. In my apartment, I hung my coat, put my phone face down on the counter, and stood in the kitchen until the refrigerator kicked on and the hum steadied my breathing. Then I turned the phone over and did one more quiet thing. I opened the company ethics portal and read it top to bottom, like a man trying to find a map in a language he already speaks. The rules were not heroic. They were specific. Maintain accurate records, report suspected retaliation, protect confidential information. I could follow those with my eyes closed. I washed the cinnamon off my hands, sat at the small table I bought, used when I moved here, and opened my notebook to a fresh page. Across the top, I wrote a sentence I'd need later. I'm not a gift in his hands. I'm the guy who keeps promises. Under it, I listed the promises I still owed before year's end and the people who were counting on them. The list was long enough to keep me honest. When the heat clicked off and the apartment cooled a fraction, I got up, opened the window for one lungful of outside air, and closed it again. My phone buzzed on the counter. 3 party photos I was tagged in and a calendar reminder for Monday's final review with the client. I dismissed the photos, kept the calendar alert, and laid the phone face down again. I had a voice memo with a whisper on it, a year of receipts that said I was not imaginary, and a simple truth that didn't need a speech. If they planned to make me disappear after Christmas, they were going to learn how hard it is to erase the person who carried the weight. Then I turned off the light and let the room go dark, like a stage after the curtain falls. If part 1 was the shock, the overheard whisper in red uplight, then part 2 is the anatomy of the deal itself. Why 5 maple syllars didn't fall from the sky, why the client trusted me over a brand name, and why my boss couldn't fake that trust, no matter how many stage lights he stood under. The deal wasn't just a number. It was 12 months of stitched-together nights and mornings, each one a thread no one else wanted to touch, because it looked too frayed, too messy, too unbillable. If you've ever walked into a client plan at 2 in the morning and smelled ozone from a burnt sensor while a line supervisor stared at you like you'd ruined Christmas, then you know the currency of trust isn't a contract. It's a nod when you show up anyway. January started with a failed pilot. Their system went down mid-run, alarms shrieking, product wasted, CFO furious. Our competitor shrugged it off as scope creep. I drove out with a rental laptop, stayed until dawn, and wrote a 12-line workaround that wasn't elegant, but kept them shipping. No applause, just exhaustion and a sticky cup of vending machine coffee. But the COO noticed. She was there in a sling from her broken wrist, tapping updates one-handed, saying thank you in a voice you only use when you know someone's risking their weekend for your people. That was the first thread. February bled into March with procurement hounding us for performance data. Our legal team wanted positioning language. My boss wanted momentum. What the client wanted was simple. Proof the system wouldn't fail them again. I dug up error logs, annotated them with context, circled timestamps where human error, not hardware, was the culprit. I didn't sugarcoat it. I wrote, "We failed here, here, and here. Here's how we won't fail again." The email subject line was dry. Pilot findings V3. But inside, it was the closest thing to honesty anyone had handed them in months. By April, the COO invited me to a plant tour. No executives, no glossy decks. Just me, a handful of engineers, and floors so slick with oil mist you could smell metal in the air. We spent 4 hours walking, stopping, rerouting. I left with steel toe boots ruined and a notebook packed with doodled process maps. Later, when the CFO asked why we'd build travel without a presentation, I showed him the notebook. "This is the presentation," I said. He didn't smile, but he stopped asking. June was a tipping point. My boss called me into a glass conference room, leaned back like a king, and said, "You're over-investing. Optics matter more than over time." He wanted the deal closed fast to hit quarterly bonuses. I told him what I told the client. Optics don't keep lines running. He frowned, marked something in his planner, and dismissed me. That's when the quiet sabotage started. Travel approvals delayed. Executive presence feedback dropped in my file. Little cuts meant to remind me who owned my badge. But here's the thing. Clients notice what you think they don't. In July, during a supplier summit, the COO's assistant whispered, "You're the only one who looks us in the eye when things break." I laughed, thought it was nothing, but 2 weeks later she copied me on an internal memo. Preferred contact, my name. Not my boss, not the VP. Me. That line was worth more than any press release. By September, the deal grew teeth. $5 wasn't just a headline. It was phased rollouts, service guarantees, penalties for missed uptime. Procurement hammered us. Legal grilled us. My boss swooped in for photo ops, then vanished when negotiations turned granular. The client noticed again. One night, after a 12-hour review session, the COO leaned back, rubbed her wrist, and said, "You're not flashy. That's why I trust you." It hit harder than any bonus. October brought the real test, a draft internal memo I wasn't meant to see. A colleague forwarded it accidentally. My boss had written, "Transition relationship post-close to exec sponsors. Limit dependency on field staff." Field staff. That was me. They weren't planning to keep me in the picture past signatures. I printed it, slid it into my notebook, and said nothing. Not yet. By November, the weight was crushing. My calendar was red-eye flights stitched to early morning calls. I knew the client's dog had hip surgery because I stayed late on Zoom while the COO stepped out for updates. I knew her daughter was prepping for grad school apps. These weren't trivia. They were threads in the fabric of trust. Threads my boss thought he could snip without anyone noticing. December arrived with carols in the lobby, cheap wine at desks, and an MSA draft thick as a dictionary. The deal was alive, barely, but alive. And I was tired in ways sleep wouldn't fix. Yet when I walked into their conference room and saw the COO's cast finally gone, she smiled like the work had been worth it. That smile was my pay before any commission. So when my boss whispered about kicking me out after Christmas, he wasn't just plotting against me. He was plotting against every midnight fix, every annotated log, every unglamorous promise kept in the shadows of someone else's bonus. He thought a $5 million deal was a number you put on a slide. But for me and for them, it was a ledger of trust, and trust doesn't transfer with a title change. And that's why when I went home that night with cinnamon still on my hands, I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt dangerous. Because I finally understood what he never would. The deal was never his to sell. It was mine to protect. I can still hear it, the exact phrasing, the smug tone. My boss's whisper wasn't just a threat. It was a blueprint for erasing me. The next morning, I replayed the voice memo. Grainy party noise, clinking glasses, and then his voice sliding under the static. We'll kick him out after Christmas. Get signatures, then... Optics. The VP's low chuckle followed. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone like it was radioactive. Every instinct screamed to confront him, to storm into his office and slam the evidence down. But that would have been his script, anger, outburst, not a team player. They wanted me rattled. Instead, I got calm. First step, receipts. I exported my compliance logs, the ones I'd kept all year in a private, time-stamped system our IT couldn't edit. Flight records, expense reports, site visit notes, client feedback emails. I didn't doctor a thing. I just pulled the raw data and sent a copy to my personal archive using the company's approved retention tool. If they came for me, I'd have a ledger no one could burn. Second step, contemporaneous notes. I opened my notebook and wrote the whisper down word for word with date, time, location, and context. Then I underlined one phrase, after Christmas. That meant they were planning to use me through year-end, squeeze every ounce of trust I'd built, and then discard me like a disposable credential. Third step, the hotline. Our company's ethics portal wasn't glamorous, but it logged reports with case numbers and timestamps. I didn't rant. I filed a sterile note. Overheard discussion of potential retaliatory termination post-deal closure. Concerned about misuse of client relationship for internal optics. I hit submit. No emotion, no speculation, just a breadcrumb trail I could point to later. Fourth step, legal perspective. I didn't hire a lawyer outright, but I called a mentor, a retired compliance officer who owed me nothing and knew how these games were played. I told him the situation without names. He was blunt. You don't own the client, but they don't own you either. Relationship equity isn't IP. Just don't copy proprietary materials. Keep it clean, keep it factual. His advice steadied me. That night, I sat on my couch with the lights off, laptop glow painting my face, scrolling the contract draft. Page 47, Section 6.2, Performance Assurance. It gave the client the right to reassign delivery leadership if they felt bait and switch risk. I highlighted it, circled it in my notes, and realized my boss hadn't read this closely. He thought clients bought logos. He forgot they also bought people. The decision point came around 11:43 p.m. My cursor hovered over a blank email. I could torch my bridge with rage, or I could write something measured that would shift the balance without spilling a drop of trade secret. I typed slow. As we head into final signatures, I want to reassure you the scope remains entirely under your control. Delivery leadership assignments are yours to decide, as outlined in Section 6.2. If for any reason my role changes, I'll respect your decision fully. I've valued every moment of this process and remain committed to seeing your goals through, wherever that leads. I read it twice. No accusations, no fear. Just a reminder that the client, not my boss, held the pen. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop, stood in the bathroom mirror, and looked at the reflection of a man who just stepped across a line. Not into dishonor, not into sabotage, into self-defense. My boss had whispered me out of the picture, but he didn't realize I'd already whispered back in writing to the one person who could decide who stayed in frame. The air in my apartment felt different after that. Not lighter, not safe, but sharper, like oxygen before a storm. I knew the next week would hurt. HR would circle, my badge might blink red, whispers would multiply. But I also knew something my boss didn't. You can't erase the person who wrote the story the client actually believes. I turned off the lights, set my phone screen down, and whispered to the dark what he had whispered about me after Christmas. Only this time, it wasn't a threat. It was a countdown. By the time the office lights flickered on Monday morning, the clock had already started ticking. My boss thought he owned the timeline. He didn't. I arrived early, more out of instinct than strategy. The badge reader blinked red, then green, then red again. A half-second of hesitation that told me everything. It had cued my access. HR wanted the satisfaction of delivering the script face-to-face. Sure enough, by 9:10 I was in a glass box with 2 HR reps, and my boss pretending to sip lukewarm coffee. The folder on the table had my name printed in 12-point Arial, centered like a gravestone inscription. "Mutual separation," the lead HR rep said, her tone rehearsed. "Optics," my boss added, not even subtle anymore. The paperwork was neat, too neat. It offered 2 weeks' pay in exchange for my signature under a clause that quietly waived rights to external grievance filing. I read it once slowly, then pushed the pen back. "Not signing," my boss smirked. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." But here's what he didn't know. While he rehearsed his performance, my phone was already buzzing with a message from the client. "COO, invoking Section 6.2. Delivery leadership reassigned per our rights. Stop by tomorrow. Kickoff confirmed." That clause, the one buried in the MSA, the one I'd highlighted at 11:43 p.m., had just detonated. The client had formally blocked the bait and switch. And they weren't just blocking it. They were moving the $5 million deal to a competing integrator on one condition. I laid delivery as an external partner. So while HR slid tissues across the table like I was meant to cry, I was thinking about contract terms, not severance pay. I signed nothing. I collected my things, dropped my badge into the tray, and walked out lighter than I'd felt in a year. By noon, I was across town at a boutique integrator's office, their CEO shaking my hand. "We'll match your salary, double your bonus potential, and make you lead on day 1, he said. "But I want your terms." I gave them 3. 1, ethics clause in writing, no bait and switch, ever. 2, transparent pricing to the client, no hidden markups. 3, safe harbor for my old junior team, no poaching without their consent. He blinked, then smiled. "That's unusual, but done." By 3 p.m., the paperwork was signed. My laptop was wiped, my inbox gone, my name scrubbed from the org chart. But in the space my boss thought he'd cleared, something bigger had already taken root. The COO's final text of the day was short. "Appreciate your integrity. See you 9 a.m. sharp. Bring boots. Floor tour first." I set my phone down, exhaled, and let the truth settle. I hadn't been fired out of the deal. I'd been fired into it. And tomorrow, when we stepped into that war room, the $5 million wouldn't belong to the man who whispered me away. It would belong to the people who trusted the one thing he couldn't fake: follow through. For the first time in months, I slept without waking to check my calendar. The deal was no longer a weight chained to me. It was a weapon, pointed squarely back at the people who thought I was disposable. The storm broke faster than I expected. By Tuesday morning, my old firm looked less like a Fortune 500 vendor and more like a stage collapsing mid-performance. At 9 a.m., I was in steel-toe boots on the client's plant floor, shaking hands, walking through noisy aisles, sketching timelines on a clipboard. At the same hour, my old boss was in a town hall, sweating under LED lights, trying to explain why the company's biggest new account had evaporated overnight. The fallout was surgical. Procurement had logged every step, every deadline, every clause. The transfer wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. One line in a database shifted from vendor A to vendor B, but the silence that followed was devastating. No conference call, no apology, just access revoked, PO canceled, forecast slashed. By mid-morning, finance analysts inside the firm saw the gap. $5 million, gone. Spreadsheets turned red. Pipeline charts sagged. The whispers spread. What happened to the client name account? Some said compliance issues. Some said client politics. But the people who knew the truth, the ones in that party corridor, kept their mouths shut. Emails started leaking. One was a blast from my boss to the entire sales division. We remain strategically aligned and will pivot resources toward higher value pursuits. Translation: we got played and have nothing to show for it. Another email landed in my inbox from an old colleague. They're spinning it as your underperformance, but everyone saw you carry it. Don't worry, the truth's bleeding through. Attached was a screenshot. The COO's official notice citing Section 6.2 and naming me directly as the reassigned delivery lead. The optics my boss worshipped had just crushed him. By afternoon, HR scrambled. The hotline case I filed was suddenly under review. They didn't know I'd already taken my copy of the case ID home. Rumors swirled. Compliance had questions. Auditors were pulling meeting recordings, and the VP who'd chuckled at that whisper was seen leaving a closed-door session looking pale. And then the messages started rolling in. Private, be careful, from the people I once mentored. A junior analyst wrote, "They're talking layoffs. I'm scared. Any chance you could put in a word if your new place is hiring?" I did more than that. I forwarded her resume that same night to my new CEO, who replied within the hour, "Let's interview her tomorrow." A project manager DM'd me. "They're saying you sabotaged the deal, but we all saw the memo about cutting you out. Don't let them rewrite it." I smiled at that. I didn't need to. The paper trail was already stronger than spin. Then came the voicemail from my boss. His voice cracked, brittle, trying to sound angry but laced with panic. "You did this to me. Don't think you'll get away with it. You—" Click. He cut himself off before finishing, probably realizing even his voicemail was evidence now. I didn't return the call. I didn't need to. The scoreboard was already public. Because that evening, while I was drafting the new rollout plan with the client's engineers, an industry blog posted an article. $5 supply chain project reassigns vendor. Days before close. The byline didn't mention my name, but anyone who mattered knew exactly who had walked out of the wreckage with the deal intact. Inside my old firm, panic bred silence. Outside, in the plant war room with grease-smudged whiteboards and the hum of machinery in the background, there was only momentum. The project hadn't died. It had been reborn, stripped of the parasites who thought it was theirs to steal. And for the first time in a year, I wasn't carrying it alone. I was leading it on my terms. Kickoff day felt less like triumph and more like a deep exhale, the kind you don't realize you've been holding until your ribs ache. At 9 a.m., the war room was alive. Screens flickered with test environments spinning up, engineers hunched over keyboards, the COO standing at the head of the table with her wrist finally healed. She nodded at me once, quick and decisive, and said, "Let's begin. No speeches, no balloons, just work. That's what trust looks like when it's real, quiet, sharp, efficient." Within hours, the first trial run showed green checks across the board. The hum of servers drowned out the ghosts of late nights, the cheap cinnamon whiskey, the whisper that had almost erased me. Every click of confirmation was another nail in the coffin of the narrative my boss had tried to sell. By lunch, the press release hit, buried in industry feeds. Client realigns strategic partnership. $5 contract reassigned under revised delivery leadership. The old firm's name was nowhere. The rival integrator's logo was there, bold, clean, future-facing. And between the lines, everyone in our corner of the industry could read what had happened. The ripples were immediate. A colleague texted, "Town hall canceled. Word is your boss has been transitioned." Another wrote, "Compliance open to review. HR can't bear your case now." And then the sharpest cut of all, a note from finance contacts inside, projections downgraded, layoffs looming. The same layoffs my boss had sworn he'd avoid by cutting me loose. But here's the truth. I didn't gloat. I didn't screenshot headlines or draft a victory post. Karma didn't need my help. It was already clocking in overtime. Instead, I kept my eyes on the rollout plan. The deal was never about revenge. It was about proving that follow-through beats optics every single time. Still, closure has a way of finding you. That evening, I boxed up my old company badge. The plastic felt thin in my hand, like it had always been a prop. I slid it into an envelope with a short note. For the team. Thank you for the work, the nights, the grit. Carry it forward. No bitterness, no names, just truth. Then I signed the SOW addendum for the client. Steady hand, no tremor, no second guessing. This time the ink dried on my terms. When I left the office, the sky was the color of steel, heavy with winter. My boots crunched salt on the sidewalk. I walked slow, breathing air that felt sharper than any bonus check. Behind me, the machines roared steady, green lights blinking like a pulse, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. The deal was sold. The trust was intact, and the people who tried to erase me were already erased by their own shadows. I didn't whisper it out loud, but the thought carried me into the night. They thought I was disposable. Turns out I was the only part of the story that couldn't be replaced.